Carol Baxter, president of the Harmony Creek Estates Homeowners Association, believed in order. It wasn't merely a preference. It was a creed, a fundamental law of the universe that she, and she alone, in this blighted corner of suburbia, seemed to fully grasp. Order was a perfectly manicured lawn, with blades of fescue cut to a uniform 3 inches. Order was beige and taupe siding, unsullied by the garish whims of individual expression. Order was the quiet, dignified hum of a community living in serene, predictable harmony. It was right there in the name. The object that violated this sacred order was a malevolent, 4-propellered insect of plastic and carbon fiber. It buzzed with the obnoxious whine of 1,000 mosquitoes, a sound that grated on Carol's very soul as she inspected Mrs. Henderson's rose bushes for any sign of non-compliant pruning. The drone, a gaudy splash of neon green against the cerulean sky, hovered, dipped, and then zipped with reckless abandon over the wrought iron fence that separated the pristine sanctuary of Harmony Creek from the untamed wilderness of the adjacent non-HOA neighborhood. Unlicensed aerial vehicle, Carol muttered, her lips thinning into a razor-straight line. She pulled a small leather-bound notebook and a silver pen from her blazer pocket. Article 4, Section 2B, Nuisances, the operation of any noisy or unsanctioned mechanical device, including but not limited to. Before she could finish her notation, the drone faltered. It sputtered, its annoying whine turning into a pathetic, choking cough. It listed drunkenly to one side, corrected itself, then plummeted from the sky like a stone. It crashed with a sickening crunch into the petunias of the Harmony Creek Welcome Garden, not 10 feet from the meticulously carved riverstone sign her late husband, Harold, had commissioned. Carol's heart hammered against her ribs. This was not just a violation, it was a desecration. Harold had designed this garden. He had chosen every riverstone, every perennial. The drone lay there, a broken toy amidst the broken flowers, an affront to his memory. A moment later, a head of unruly brown hair popped up over the top of the fence. A boy, no older than 10 or 11, with a smattering of freckles across his nose and a t-shirt bearing the chaotic image of some cartoon robot, scrambled over the iron bars. He landed with a soft thud on the hallowed turf of Harmony Creek, his sneakers leaving faint but undeniable impressions in the dukiest grass. He was a trespasser, an invader. "Oh no," the boy whispered. Rushing toward the flower bed, Carol moved with the swift, predatory grace of a hawk spotting a field mouse. "Halt," she commanded, her voice echoing with an authority honed by years of chairing contentious budget meetings. The boy froze, one hand outstretched towards his fallen machine. He turned, his eyes wide and startled. "Oh, hi, sorry, my drone. It just sort of died." "It did not die," Carol corrected, closing the distance between them. She stood over him, a formidable presence in her sensible flats and beige pantsuit. "It crashed, because you were operating it recklessly over private property. Do you have any idea of the bylaws you have just violated?" The boy blinked, a picture of pure confusion. "Bylaws? I was just flying my drone. It's my birthday present." "A birthday present does not grant you immunity from established community covenants," Carol stated, peering down at the wreckage. "You have trespassed on HOA property. You have operated an unlicensed and unapproved aerial vehicle within our airspace. You have created a public nuisance with excessive noise, and you have caused damage to HOA common property." She pointed a perfectly manicured finger at the crushed petunias. "That's destruction of property. Article 6, Section 9. The boy's lower lip began to tremble. I can fix the flowers. I'm sorry. Sorry does not resod a lawn or uncrush a petunia, young man." Carol felt a surge of righteous power. This was what she did. She brought order to chaos. She was the bulwark against the entropy that constantly threatened to seep in from the outside world. "I will need your name and your parents' contact information. A formal violation notice will be issued, along with an invoice for the damages." A ticket," the boy stammered, his eyes welling up. "For my drone? For your flagrant disregard for the rules that make this community a pleasant place to live," she said, her tone severe. She bent down, not to help, but to retrieve the drone herself. Its plastic shell was cracked. One of the propellers snapped clean off. She held it as if it were radioactive evidence. "This will be held as collateral until the fines are paid in full." This was a critical moment. She knew it. Make an example of the boy, and the word would spread through the lawless lands beyond the fence. Harmony Creek was not a playground, it was a jurisdiction. The boy's face crumpled. "No, please. That's mine. My dad will kill me." "Then, perhaps your father should have taught you about respecting property boundaries." Tears now streamed freely down the boy's face. He took a step toward her, his small hands reaching for the drone. "Please, lady, just give it back. I'll never fly it here again. I promise." "Promises from violators are inadmissible," Carol said coolly, holding the drone behind her back. "Your name?" A switch flipped in the boy. Fear turned to a desperate childish fury. He lunged, not at her, but at the drone. He tried to snatch it from her hand, his small fingers brushing against hers. Carol recoiled as if struck. "Assault. You are now assaulting an officer of the Homeowners Association." She sidestepped his clumsy grab, her sensible flat twisting on the soft grass. She stumbled, catching her balance on the welcome sign. The cold stone against her palm felt like Harold's reassuring hand. "Be strong, Carol. Defend our home. I didn't touch you," the boy cried, his voice thick with sobs. He backed away, his face a mess of terror and regret. "I just want my drone." He turned and bolted, not back toward the fence, but deeper, into Harmony Creek, as if he could somehow lose himself in the maze of identical cul-de-sacs. "Oh no. You don't," Carol growled. Her duty was clear. A violator was at large. She clutched the broken drone and gave chase. It was, objectively, a ridiculous sight. A woman in her late 50s, dressed for a board meeting, sprinting after a 10-year-old boy through a neighborhood, so quiet you could hear the sprinklers click on. Windows twitched, curtains parted. Carol could feel the eyes of her constituents upon her. She had to maintain control. The boy was fast, but he was panicked and didn't know the layout. Carol did. She knew every curve, every shortcut through the common area breezeways. She cut him off at the corner of Serenity Lane and Tranquility Court, blocking his path to the community pool. "There is nowhere to run," she panted, her chest burning. "You are only making this worse for yourself. Fleeing an HOA officer is a serious infraction." The boy skidded to a stop, cornered. He looked wildly around, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Just then, a black SUV with tinted windows pulled up to the curb. The passenger door flew open, and a man in his 40s, with a stressed, rumpled look and the same brown hair as the boy, jumped out. "Leo, what in God's name is going on?" he yelled, his eyes darting from his son to Carol. The boy Leo ran to his father, burying his face in his legs. "She took my drone. I didn't do anything." The man, Mark, put a protective arm around his son and glared at Carol. "Who are you? Why are you chasing my son?" "I am Carol Baxter, president of the Harmony Creek HOA, she announced, straightening her blazer and trying to regain her composure. "And your son is a trespasser who has caused property damage and assaulted me." She held up the broken drone as Exhibit A. Mark's face cycled from confusion to disbelief, then settled on pure, unadulterated anger. "Assaulted you. He's 10 years old. He came to get his toy. Now give it back." "This is evidence," Carol said, her voice turning to ice. "It will be returned upon payment of the fines and damages, which currently stand at $150 for the landscaping, plus a $75 penalty for evasive actions. That's $225. She was inventing the evasive action, fine on the spot, but it felt right. It felt orderly. Mark stared at her as if she had sprouted a second head. He let out a short, sharp laugh that held no humor. "You're trying to find my son. We don't live here. Your ridiculous rules don't apply to him. When he crossed that fence, he entered this jurisdiction," Carol insisted, her knuckles white around the drone. "Ignorance of the law is not an excuse. This isn't the law, it's a power trip," Mark shot back, his voice rising. "You're a bored woman in a pantsuit trying to bully a child. Now, give me the drone before I lose my temper." He took a step forward. His posture was aggressive, his jaw tight. Carol felt a genuine prickle of fear. This man was a brute, an outsider who didn't understand the delicate ecosystem she curated. He was the chaos. She was the order. An order had tools at its disposal. "You are threatening me," she said, her voice trembling slightly, but she quickly masked it with indignation. "That is the last straw." She pulled out her phone. "I am calling the police." Mark's eyes widened. "You're calling the cops on a 10-year-old? Are you insane?" "I am calling them to report a trespasser, destruction of property, and a hostile, threatening individual," she said, her fingers dancing across the screen. She savored the moment, the shift in power. The police were an extension of order, a higher authority that would surely see things her way. As she pressed the call button. The walk from the corner of Serenity and Tranquility to her own front door on Harmony Creek Circle felt like a mile-long march through enemy territory. Every curtain seemed to twitch with accusation. Every silent window felt like a judging eye. The business card in Carol's hand was no longer a piece of paper. It was a brand, a searing mark of her public humiliation. She could feel the perfect, orderly world Harold had built. The world she had sworn to uphold, beginning to fracture around her. Her home was her fortress. Number 1, Harmony Creek Circle. The model home. Harold had overseen its construction himself. Inside there was no chaos. The hardwood floors gleamed with a lemon-scented polish. The throw pillows on the sofa were perpetually karate chopped in the center. In the foyer, a large gilt-framed portrait of Harold watched over the entrance. He wore a kind but firm expression, the same one he'd had when explaining to the original homeowners why a fuchsia-colored front door was simply out of the question. "They don't understand." "Harold," Carol whispered to the portrait, her voice trembling as she finally shut the door on the outside world. The heavy oak clicked shut, a sound that was usually reassuring but now felt like the closing of a tomb. "They bring their noise, and their children, and their law firms." She sank into a stiff antique armchair that no one ever actually sat in, staring at the business card. Amelia Graham-esque, partner. The title mocked her. Carol was a president, a leader, but But partner at a firm like Donahue, Sterling, and Finch was a different echelon of power entirely. It was corporate power, predatory power. It's a scare tactic, she said aloud, testing the words in the silent room. A bluff. They think they can intimidate me into submission. She stood and began to pace, her sensible flats silent on the Persian rug. The boy had trespassed. He had caused damage. The father had been hostile. She had followed protocol. She had been wronged. The narrative solidified in her mind, a shield against the creeping tendrils of doubt. She was the victim here. She was the one defending the principles of civilized living. This Amelia Graham was nothing more than an overeducated bully, using her fancy degree to defend the indefensible actions of her coddled son, her resolve hardening. Carol marched into Harold's old study. It was preserved exactly as he had left it, down to the stack of architectural digests on the mahogany desk. This was her war room. She sat in his large leather chair, the cool material a familiar comfort, and powered on the desktop computer. The time for denial was over. The time for intelligence gathering had begun. She typed Donahue, Sterling, and Finch into the search bar. The results filled the screen, an avalanche of prestige and power. Their website was sleek and merciless, all chrome, glass, and pictures of lawyers with shark-like smiles. Their slogan, embossed under the firm's name, read, resolving conflict, achieving dominance. A chill snaked down Carol's spine. This wasn't a firm that sent polite letters. This was a firm that achieved dominance. She clicked on the Our Team tab and found Amelia Graham's profile. The photo was the same woman from the cul-de-sac, but professionally lit, her calm expression now looking less like placidity and more like supreme, unshakable confidence. The biography was a litany of triumphs. Graduated top of her class from a prestigious law school, clerked for a federal judge, specialized in high-stakes property disputes, torts, and civil litigation. There was a list of her notable cases, sanitized for public consumption but hinting at massive settlements and defeated corporations. One headline from a legal journal read, Graham secures 8-figure settlement in zoning dispute. Another praised her scorched earth tactics in a complex easement case. Carol's mouth went dry. This wasn't a lawyer, this was a weapon of mass destruction in a sensible blouse. Her search for reassurance had only unearthed a deep well of terror. She felt like a small-town constable who had just tried to write a parking ticket for the mafia. For a brief, flickering moment, a single thought of surrender entered her mind. Maybe I should call them, apologize, offer to pay for the drone. But the thought was immediately crushed by a wave of righteous fury. Apologize to the people who had invaded her sanctuary and threatened its very foundations. Never. That would be a betrayal of Harold, a betrayal of Harmony Creek, a betrayal of order itself. The doorbell rang 2 days later, a sharp, intrusive chime that shattered the morning quiet. It wasn't the mailman or a neighbor. It was a courier, a young man in a crisp uniform holding a digital clipboard and a large, stiff document envelope. For Carol Baxter, he asked. I am she, Carol said, her posture rigid. She signed the screen, and he handed her the envelope. It was from Donahue, Sterling, and Finch. It was heavier than a normal letter. She took it to the kitchen island, her heart thudding up, nervous rhythm against her ribs. With a silver letter opener, she sliced it open. Inside was not a simple letter. It was a 10-page document, printed on heavy bond paper, bound by a staple in the corner. The language was a dense, suffocating thicket of legal terminology. Demand for preservation of evidence and notice of impending litigation. Carol's eyes scanned the page, catching terrifying phrases. Intentional infliction of emotional distress upon a minor, Leo Graham, unlawful restraint and false imprisonment, slander per se in your deliberately false and malicious report to law enforcement, extortionary demands for monies under fraudulent pretenses. The letter demanded a formal, written apology to be published in the Harmony Creek HOA newsletter. It demanded reimbursement for the drone, valued at $450. It demanded a further $5,000 for the psychological trauma and distress inflicted upon their son, and it demanded that Carol and the HOA board of directors attend a mandatory 8-hour sensitivity training course on child psychology and conflict resolution, to be administered by a firm of their choosing, at the HOA's expense. If these demands were not met within 10 business days, the letter stated, they would pursue all available legal remedies to the fullest extent of the law, including, but not limited to, filing a civil action for punitive damages against both the Harmony Creek Estates HOA and Carol Baxter in her personal capacity. The words leaped off the page and slapped her across the face. This wasn't just about the HOA's insurance policy anymore. They were coming for her home, for Harold's portrait and his mahogany desk. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through her armor of indignation. She needed help. She needed a lawyer. She needed the HOA's lawyer. Gary Littman was not a weapon of mass destruction. He was a single-shot, slightly rusty pistol. A semi-retired general practitioner, Gary handled the HOA's affairs from a small, cluttered office above a laundromat. He was paid a modest retainer to draft letters to residents with overgrown hedges and to place liens on the homes of the chronically delinquent. He was competent, cautious, and, Carol suddenly realized with a sickening lurch, completely and utterly out of his depth. She sat opposite him in his cramped office, the air thick with the smell of old paper and fabric, softener from downstairs. She slid the demand letter across his desk. "This is an outrageous attack. Gary," she said, her voice a tightly controlled quiver. "It's a baseless assault on our community's integrity. We need to formulate a strong, defiant response." Gary put on his reading glasses and began to read. Carol watched his face. His usual placid, slightly bored expression slowly melted away, replaced by a slack-jawed horror. He read phrases aloud in a disbelieving whisper. False imprisonment. Slander per se. Personal capacity. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes, as if trying to wipe the words from his memory. He looked at Carol, his expression now one of profound alarm. "Carol, my God, what did you do?" "I did my duty," she snapped. "I confronted a trespasser." "You confronted a partner at Donahue, Sterling, and Finch," he corrected, tapping the letterhead with a trembling finger. "These aren't people, Carol. They're a legal threshing machine. I've seen them dismantle corporations with deeper pockets than God. You don't fight them, you don't posture, you don't do anything to keep yourself on their radar. So we just capitulate. We pay these we apologize for upholding our own rules," she demanded, her voice rising. "Yes," Gary said, leaning forward, his voice a desperate hiss. "That is exactly what you do. You write the check. You draft the most groveling, bootlicking apology. You can stomach, you sign up for whatever ridiculous sensitivity training they want. You do whatever it takes to make them go away. This is not a battle, Carol. This is damage control." "No," she said, the word cold and hard as granite. "This is a matter of principle. Harold founded this community on principles. If we surrender now, we surrender everything he stood for." Gary slumped back in his chair, a look of utter defeat on his face. Harold wasn't facing Amelia Graham. "Carol, listen to me. Your personal assets are on the line. The HOA's directors and officers' insurance might cover some of this. But if they can prove intentional malice, and trust me, they will try, the policy could be voided. That means you, personally, you could lose your house." The threat hung in the musty air between them, but in her mind, Carol saw the smirking face of Mark, the cool, calculating eyes of Amelia. She saw the broken drone in her pristine garden. To surrender was to let them win, to let the chaos triumph over order. "You are the HOA's legal counsel, Gary?" "Yes." The sheaf of papers lay on the polished mahogany of the dining room table, like a declaration of surrender. For a full 10 seconds, the only sound in the room was the frantic, shallow breathing of Mr. Abernathy, the HOA treasurer. The lawsuit wasn't just a document. It was a living entity, a monster that had breached the walls of Carol's fortress and was now sitting at the head of her table. Susan, the landscaping chair, and Carol's perpetual thorn in the side, was the first to break the spell. She stood up, her chair scraping harshly against the floor, and reached across the table. "Let me see that." Carol instinctively pulled the papers closer. "This is a legal matter for the board's counsel." "Carol, you are the legal matter," Susan retorted, her voice sharp as broken glass. She snatched the summons from Carol's unresisting fingers. Her eyes, alight with a grim, vindicated fire, scanned the first page. $2 million, she announced to the room, drawing out each word. "And Carol Baxter, an individual, they're suing you, Carol, personally, for being a reckless, power-hungry bully. That is a malicious and baseless interpretation," Carol shot back, her voice higher than she intended. She could feel the foundations of her authority turning to sand beneath her feet. Mr. Abernathy, a man whose complexion naturally hovered around beige, had turned a concerning shade of gray. "Our directors and officers' policy," he stammered, wringing his hands. "I think the liability cap is $1 million. Does it cover punitive damages? Oh heavens, our premiums, our dues will have to be tripled." The other two board members, usually silent sycophants, exchanged a look of pure, unadulterated panic. Their loyalty to Carol had always been predicated on her strength, on the belief that she was an immovable object. Now, she looked very, very movable. "This meeting is adjourned," Carol declared, standing up with a regal bearing. She did not feel. "I will be in contact with our legal counsel, Gary Lippman, too." "Sit down, Carol," Susan commanded. The sheer audacity of the order stunned Carol into silence. Susan had never used that tone with her before. "You don't adjourn this meeting. You are the subject of this meeting. I move for an emergency session, effective immediately, to discuss the board's response to this catastrophic failure of leadership." "Seconded," Mr. Abernathy squeaked, his fear of financial ruin apparently eclipsing his fear of Carol. Carol stood frozen, outnumbered and outmaneuvered in her own dining room. The mutiny was no longer brewing. It was in full swing. "This is improper procedure," she managed to say, her voice hollow. "We'll add it to the list of things you've done improperly," Susan sneered. "The motion is to discuss the immediate suspension of Carol Baxter from the office of president to mitigate further legal and financial exposure to this board and this community. All in favor?" Susan's hand shot up. Mr. Abernathy's trembled, its way into the air. The other two members looked at each other, then at Carol's pale, furious face, and slowly, reluctantly, raised their hands. It was unanimous. The call to Gary Littman was even more humiliating. They served you, at your home. During a board meeting, Gary's voice was a frantic squeak over the phone. Oh, this is bad, Carol, this is professional. They're making a statement. What am I supposed to do, Gary? Carol asked, the question tasting like ash in her mouth. For the first time in years, she didn't have a protocol for this. You're supposed to do nothing, he practically yelled. I have to report this to the D&O insurance carrier immediately. They'll take over. They'll assign their own counsel. You are not to speak to anyone about this case. You are not to write letters. You are not to confront your neighbors. You are a defendant now. You need to act like one. Silent and scared. Silent and scared. The words were anathema to everything Carol was. She ended the call feeling utterly powerless. A pawn in a game she had started but no longer controlled. The next day she received a call from a Mr. Thorne, a lawyer with the firm contracted by the insurance company. His voice was cold, clipped, and utterly devoid of sympathy. He was not her lawyer, he was the insurance company's lawyer. It was a crucial distinction he made sure to emphasize. His job was not to protect her reputation or Harold's legacy. His job was to protect his client's money. Double quotes, Mrs. Baxter, Thorne began, without any pleasantries. I have reviewed the complaint filed by Graham. Frankly, it's a cannon aimed at a canoe. Your actions, as described, have exposed both yourself and the HOA to significant liability. From this moment forward, you will have no contact with the plaintiff or her family. You will not discuss this case with your neighbors. You will not post about it on any community forum. All communications will go through me. Is that understood? I have a right to defend my actions, Carol said, bristling. No, Thorne corrected, his voice like chipping ice. You have a right to an attorney, which my client is providing. Your job is to listen to that attorney. Your defense will be that your actions were in service of the HOA and without malice. A position which, I might add, is made significantly more difficult by the fact that you pursued and terrified a 10-year-old child. So please, for the sake of my client's bottom line, refrain from defending yourself any further. The news of the $2 million lawsuit ripped through Harmony Creek's online message board with the speed of a digital brush fire. Violating Thorne's direct order, Carol logged on, her hands trembling. The homepage, usually filled with tame posts about lost cats and recommendations for gardeners, was a battlefield. A thread titled, Official Recall, Petition for President. Baxter had over 100 replies. Frank_P Tranquility CT. I always said she was out of control. Now my property values are going to tank because she had to play dictator with some kid. Recall now. Brenda_H Serenity LN. This is what happens when you give someone a tiny bit of power. She tried to find me for having a pink flamingo. A pink flamingo. I hope they take her for everything she's got. That was Mrs. Henderson. Of course. Concerned homeowner 82. Is it true our dues are going to pay her legal fees? Are we paying for her to defend herself for being sued personally? The board needs to answer for this. Carol slammed the laptop shut. These were her people, her subjects. She had protected them, curated their peaceful existence, and this was their gratitude. They were a mob, turning on her at the first sign of weakness. She felt a surge of defiant rage. They didn't understand the burden she carried. They didn't understand the constant vigilance required to keep chaos at bay. The next blow came by courier 3 days later. It was another crisp, formal envelope. This one contained a notice of deposition. Amelia Graham's legal team was starting their discovery process, and the first person they wanted to question, under oath and on the record, was Carol Baxter. Thorne called her an hour later. They've scheduled your deposition for next Friday. We'll meet on Wednesday. To prepare, do not be late. The prep session was not in a comfortable office. It was in a sterile, soulless conference room in a downtown high-rise. Mr. Thorne sat opposite her at a vast, empty table. He had a single yellow legal pad in front of him. A deposition is not a conversation, Mrs. Baxter, he began, his eyes cold and analytical. It is a memory test. You will be under oath. The opposing counsel, Mrs. Graham herself, I imagine, will ask you questions. Your job is to answer only the question that is asked. Do not volunteer information. Do not explain your reasoning. Do not try to justify your actions. Yes? No. I don't recall. Those are your new 3 best friends. I have nothing to hide, Carol stated, squaring her shoulders. Thorne gave a short, mirthless laugh. Everyone has something to hide. My job is to make sure you don't accidentally reveal it. Let's role play. I am Mrs. Graham. Please state your name for the record. Carol Baxter. Mrs. Baxter, on the morning of August 12th, did you observe a minor child, Leo Graham, enter the grounds of Harmony Creek Estates? Yes, he was a trespasser. Thorne slammed his pen on the table. Wrong. You just volunteered illegal. Conclusion. Trespasser is for a court to decide. The answer is yes. Let's try again. For the next 2 hours, he vivisected her. He twisted her words, picked apart her motivations, and exposed every flaw in her story. Mrs. Baxter, Are you a licensed child psychologist? No, of course not. Then on what basis did you conclude my client's son was not acting under duress or fear when he ran from you? He was fleeing. It was evasive. Is evasive a medical or psychological term you are qualified to use, or is it just a word you chose to justify chasing a terrified child through the streets? Which is it? I is upholding the by Lost Article 6, Section 9, destruction of property. Correct. Yes. Does that by law grant you, personally, the authority to use physical restraint on a minor? I didn't restrain him. You blocked his path, did you not? You stood between him and his avenue of escape. You used your physical presence to impede his freedom of movement. Is that not your testimony? Carol felt the walls closing in. Her narrative, so clear and righteous in her own mind, sounded flimsy and monstrous when dissected like this. Mrs. Baxter, Thorne continued, his voice softening into a dangerously silky tone, let's talk about your husband, Harold Baxter, the founder of Harmony Creek. Is it fair to say you see your role as president as a way of honoring his legacy? The question caught her off guard. He believed in order, in standards, so when you saw that drone, that boy, it felt like a... Mr. Abernathy's hand, wrinkled and spotted with age, completed its shaky ascent. It hung in the air of the community clubhouse, a pale flag of surrender. For Carol, the sight was not just a political defeat. It was the final, creaking snap of the world's spine. The vote was 3-1. The motion carried. Susan, a triumphant smirk playing on her lips, picked up the small wooden gavel from the table. The motion to suspend Carol Baxter from the duties of president is passed, she announced, her voice resonating with a power she had craved for years. She brought the gavel down. The sharp crack echoed in the silent room, a sound that served as the full stop at the end of Carol's reign. This meeting of the Harmony Creek Estates Board is adjourned. No one looked at Carol as she stood, her chair scraping against the linoleum floor. Mr. Abernathy was diligently studying his shoelaces. The other two board members were suddenly fascinated by the texture of the ceiling. Only Susan met her gaze, her eyes cold and victorious. The walk home was a disorienting haze. The familiar, orderly streetscape of Harmony Creek now seemed alien, hostile. The uniform mailboxes stood like silent soldiers guarding enemy territory. The perfectly edged lawns felt like they were mocking her, their pristine blades a testament to an order she could no longer command. She had been the shepherd of this flock, and they had just handed her crook to a wolf. Inside her fortress, she did not go to Harold's portrait. She couldn't bear his imagined disappointment. She was no longer President Baxter, the fierce guardian of his legacy. She was just Carol, the suspended, the sued, the pariah of Harmony Creek Circle. The title, the very core of her identity, for the last decade, had been stripped away, leaving a raw, hollow void. The next morning, the humiliation began in earnest. Through her kitchen window, she saw Mr. Davies from down the street leaving his recycling bin on the curb, a full 12 hours past the Tuesday evening deadline specified in Article 9, Section 4. Her hand reflexively went to her blazer pocket for her violation notebook, but the pocket was empty. The blazer, her uniform of power, now felt like a costume. She had no authority. She couldn't write a ticket. She couldn't enforce the rule. All she could do was watch the royal blue plastic bin glint mockingly in the morning sun, a monument to her own impotence. An hour later, an email arrived. The sender was Acting President Susan. The subject, important community update. Dear residents, it began. In light of recent legal challenges facing our community, the board has voted to temporarily suspend Carol Baxter from her presidential duties. This proactive measure is to ensure fiscal responsibility and prudent leadership during this sensitive time. All HOA-related inquiries should now be directed to me. We appreciate your understanding as we navigate this transition. It was a public execution, delivered with the sterile efficiency of a corporate memo. Carol felt a hot flush of rage and shame. She was no longer just suspended. She was a legal challenge, a sensitive time to be navigated. Her house, once her command center, now felt like a prison. Thorne's words echoed in her ears, silent and scared. She was a defendant. The deposition loomed, a black hole on her calendar. Friday, that drive downtown with Thorne was a silent, tense affair. He didn't offer comforting words. He offered only a final grim warning. As they stood before the gleaming glass tower of Donahue, Sterling, and Finch, they will try to make you comfortable. They will try to make you angry. They will try to make you sad, he said, adjusting his tie. Your only emotion is boredom. Your only desire is to leave. You are a rock in a river. You do not explain. You do not elaborate. You do not feel. You simply exist until I tell you that you can stop. Am I clear? Crystal, Carol lied, her heart hammering like a trapped bird. The offices of Donahue, Sterling, and Finch were designed to intimidate. The lobby was a vast cathedral of marble and glass, with abstract art on the walls that probably cost more than Carol's house. A receptionist with a headset and an unnervingly serene smile directed them to a conference room on the 45th floor. The room had one wall made entirely of glass, offering a panoramic godlike view of the city below. And there, sitting at the head of a long, polished table, was Amelia Graham. She was not the frazzled mother from the cul-de-sac. Today, she wore a dark, impeccably tailored suit, her hair pulled back in a severe bun. She looked like the CEO of an ancient estate. She stood as they entered, extending a hand to Thorne. "Mr. Thorne, thank you for coming." Her voice was the same as Carol remembered, calm, quiet, and absolutely lethal. She then turned to Carol, her eyes holding not a flicker of animosity, but a kind of detached, professional curiosity. "Mrs. Baxter, I'm Amelia Graham. Please, have a seat." The politeness was more terrifying than any threat. A court reporter, a rail-thin woman with nimble fingers, sat at a small machine, ready to transcribe every word into the immutable record. Carol sat opposite Amelia, with Thorne at her side. The air was thick with the silent hum of the building's climate control. "This will be the deposition of Carol Baxter, taken in the matter of Graham versus Harmony Creek Estates Homeowners Association and Carol Baxter," Amelia began, her voice formal. She nodded to the court reporter. "Let's go on the record." She started softly, just as Thorne had predicted. She asked about Carol's address, her history with the HOA, the names of the other board members. The questions were simple, designed to be answered with short, factual responses. Carol, channeling all her energy into being Thorne's rock, answered in a clipped monotone, "Yes, 10 years. Susan Miller, Thomas Abernathy." Then, Amelia slid a piece of paper across the table. "Mrs. Baxter, I'd like to mark this as Exhibit A. It's a printout from the Harmony Creek online forum, dated 3 months ago. Could you read the post by Brenda_H for the record?" Carol's blood ran cold. It was the post about the pink flamingo. Thorne had seen it. She had ignored him. I don't see how this is relevant," Carol stammered. "Objection. Not responsive." "Please answer the question, Mrs. Baxter," Amelia said, her voice still gentle. Thorne put a hand on Carol's arm. "Answer the question, Carol. Just read it." Miserably, Carol read the post aloud. "This is what happens when you give someone a tiny bit of power. She tried to find me for having a pink flamingo." "Thank you," Amelia said, taking the paper back. "So, Mrs. Baxter, is it fair to say that enforcing even the most minor aesthetic guidelines of the community has been a significant focus of your presidency?" "My focus is upholding all the bylaws," Carol said stiffly. "Even those concerning decorative lawn ornaments." "Yes." Beside her, Carol could feel Thorne's frustration radiating like heat. Amelia had established a pattern of behavior. Petty tyranny. It was step 1. Then, Amelia's tone shifted. It softened, becoming almost conspiratorial. "Mrs. Baxter, I've read the articles of incorporation for Harmony Creek. Your late husband, Harold Baxter, was the visionary behind it all, wasn't he? The architect of this order." The mention of Harold made Carol's defenses flicker. He had very high standards. "It must be an immense pressure," Amelia mused, leaning forward slightly, "to be the sole guardian of a man's legacy, especially a man you loved so deeply." Thorne cleared his throat, a subtle warning, but the hook was in. Amelia was no longer questioning the president. She was speaking to the widow. "He poured his life into this community," Carol said, her voice thick with an emotion she had been suppressing. "He believed that a beautiful, orderly environment led to better, more peaceful lives. And when you saw my son's drone," Amelia continued, her voice a soft, sympathetic whisper, "a chaotic, noisy machine from the outside world, crashing into the welcome garden your husband himself designed, that must have felt like a desecration of his memory." This was the moment. Thorne's training, his voice in her head screaming, "Don't explain, don't justify," battled with a decade of pent-up grief and a desperate, burning need to be understood. The dam of her composure broke. "You don't understand," Carol began, her voice cracking. Thorne visibly flinched beside her. It wasn't just a drone. It was a symbol of the chaos, the ugliness, the disrespect that is constantly trying to seep through the fences. "People like your husband, they laugh at our rules. They call it a power trip, but they don't see the beauty of the whole." Harold saw it. He saw that harmony isn't an accident. It's an achievement. It has to be defended. "Batboy, your son, he didn't just break a rule. He trampled on a dream. My husband's dream. And yes, I defended it, and I would do it again," she finished, breathless and flushed, her heart laid bare on the polished conference table. She had done it. She had finally explained herself. She looked at Amelia, expecting to see a flicker of comprehension, perhaps even respect. Instead, Amelia Graham's face was a placid mask. She made a small note on her pad. She had not been seeking to understand. She had been seeking a confession, and Carol had just given it to her. "Thank you, Mrs. Baxter," Amelia said, her voice reverting to its cool, professional tone. "That was very illuminating. I have no further questions at this time." She closed her notebook. The deposition was over. Carol had lasted less than an hour. The elevator ride down was a silent tomb. Thorne didn't speak until they were in the sterile, gray concrete of the parking garage. He stopped by his car, turned, and looked at her, his face a mask of cold, professional rage. "Congratulations, Mrs. Baxter, H. The email sat on the screen, a beacon of false hope in the ruins of Carol's life. A low monetary settlement, a way out. For a fleeting moment, relief washed over her, a cool balm on the raw wounds of her humiliation. The HOA could pay it. The nightmare could be over. She could retreat into the quiet solitude of her home and lick her wounds, emerging months later, perhaps to reclaim some sliver of her former existence. But the relief curdled the instant her eyes fell upon the final condition, Condition 4. The property at 7 Larkspur Lane, currently owned by the Harmony Creek Estates HOA, is to be sold to our client for the sum of $1. Carol's breath hitched. 7 Larkspur Lane, the old groundskeeper's cottage. It was a phantom property, a relic from before Harmony Creek was even a blueprint. The cottage sat on a forgotten, undeveloped half-acre at the farthest edge of the community, overgrown with ivy and neglect. It was structurally unsound, worthless, and its existence was a historical footnote known only to her and the dusty archives in Harold's study. Why would Amelia Graham, a woman of immense wealth and power, want a dilapidated shack in the middle of nowhere? How did she even know it existed, let alone that the HOA, and not some long-dead farmer, held the deed? A new, chilling narrative began to form in Carol's mind. The drone incident, the aggressive lawsuit, the public humiliation, the deposition designed to break her. It wasn't a campaign of punishment, it was a campaign of distraction. A meticulously planned siege, with the true objective being not the surrender of the queen, but the capture of this one, insignificant square on the board. This wasn't about justice, it was about real estate. The offer was no longer a lifeline, it was a Trojan horse. And Carol, against all logic and sanity, knew she could not let it inside the gates. Her first move was not to call a lawyer, but to retreat deeper into her fortress, into the one place where the truth might lie, Harold's study. This time, she wasn't looking for comfort in his memory, she was looking for his secrets. In the back of a deep filing cabinet, behind old tax returns and architectural drawings, was a series of cardboard document boxes labeled pre-dev. For hours, she sifted through brittle deeds, topographical maps, and soil reports. The dust clinging to her clothes, her hands stained with the ghosts of old ink. Finally, in a box marked HCE Ancillary Acquisitions, she found it. A thin manila folder labeled simply Larkspur. Inside was the original deed, transferring the half-acre and the cottage from a farmer named Miller to Harold's development company for a small sum. But tucked behind the deed was another, smaller folder she had never seen before. It contained documents that had nothing to do with land acquisition. The name on this second folder made her blood run cold. It wasn't a company. It was a woman's name, Alina Rostova. Inside were a handful of items. A short-term lease agreement, dated 35 years ago, leasing the cottage at 7 Larkspur Lane to Alina Rostova for 6 months. A carbon copy of a cashier's check for $5,000, made out to Alina, dated 6 months later. And a single, handwritten note on Harold's personal stationery. The note was cryptic, his familiar cursive suddenly looking like a foreign script. Situation resolved. Final payment made. No further contact necessary. At the very bottom of the folder was a small, square photograph, slightly faded to sepia. It showed a young woman with large, sorrowful eyes and dark hair, standing in front of the Larkspur cottage. She was holding a newborn baby. The baby was swaddled in a knitted blanket with a distinct repeating pattern of what looked like a small bird lark. Carol sank back into Harold's chair, her mind struggling to connect the pieces. A woman, a secret lease, a baby, a final payment, no further contact necessary. Harold, her Harold, the man of order and principles, had a secret that lived for 6 months in a forgotten cottage on the edge of his perfect, harmonious world. Who was Amelia Graham in this hidden drama? The timing was right. She would be about the right age. Was she the baby in the photograph? Come back to claim her mother's history? The thought was so outlandish, so melodramatic, that the old Carol would have dismissed it instantly. But the new Carol, the defendant, the pariah, knew that the world was not as orderly as it seemed. The emergency board meeting was called by Susan the very next day. They met again in the clubhouse. The sight of Carol's dethroning, she attended not as a board member, but as a resident, sitting in the back row, a ghost at the feast. Susan, radiating smug efficiency, presented the settlement offer as her own personal triumph. As you can see, she said, gesturing to a projection of the email on the wall, my firm but fair approach has yielded remarkable results. Mrs. Graham has agreed to a settlement of only $50,000, a pittance. Our insurance will cover it entirely. All they ask for in return is the deed to the old, worthless groundskeeper's shack. I think we can all agree this is a massive victory for the community. Mr. Abernathy was practically weeping. With relief, a victory indeed. Acting President, I move we accept the offer immediately. Seconded, another board member chimed in. Wait, Carol's voice cut through the celebratory murmur. She stood up from the back row. All eyes turned to her. Carol, you have no vote here, Susan said, her voice dripping with condescension. You are merely an observer. I am a homeowner, Carol countered, her voice gaining strength. And as a homeowner, I'd like to remind the acting president of our governing bylaws, something you might want to familiarize yourself with. She walked to the front of the room. Article 12, Section 2. Disposition of common assets. It states that any sale or transfer of property owned by the HOA, regardless of value, requires a formal proposal presented to the entire membership, followed by a 30-day comment period, and a final vote requiring a 2/3 majority of all homeowners. You cannot simply give away HOA property in a backroom deal, Susan. Even if it is to get yourself out of a lawsuit. She had them. She had used their own sacred texts, her texts, against them. Susan's face contorted in fury. She knew Carol was right. She had been so eager to claim victory that she had ignored the fine print. This is an obstructionist tactic. It's the law, Carol said coolly, looking at Mr. Abernathy. The law that protects all of our assets from a rash decision by a board that is clearly in over its head. The motion to accept the settlement died on the floor, snarled in the very red tape Carol had spent years perfecting. She had won the battle, but she had only bought herself time. 30 days. She needed to know what was in that cottage. The evening, as dusk settled over Harmony Creek, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and orange, Carol made her way to Larkspur Lane. The path was overgrown, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and decay. It was a pocket of wildness, of chaos, that had survived Harold's crusade for order. The cottage was even worse than she remembered. The roof sagged, the porch had collapsed, and the windows were dark, vacant eyes. A thick, ancient vine of ivy covered most of the front wall, its tendrils creeping through a broken window pane. Using a rusted old trowel she'd brought from her garden shed, she pried at the warped door until it groaned open with a screech of protest. The inside smelled of dust, mildew, and forgotten time. Moonlight streamed through the grimy windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The furniture was gone, save for a single, broken wooden chair in the corner. The floorboards were soft and rotting in places. Guided by a growing sense of dread, Carol began to search. She wasn't sure what she was looking for. A letter? A diary? Another photograph? She ran her hands along the crumbling walls, tapped on the floorboards, peered up the blackened chimney. In the small, closet-sized bedroom, one of the floorboards near the wall felt loose. Her heart quickened. Using the edge of the trowel, she pried it up. Underneath, nestled in the dark, dusty space, was a small wooden box. It wasn't locked. Her hands trembled as she lifted the lid. Inside, on a bed of yellowed cotton, lay a small, tarnished silver locket. It was simple, unadorned. She picked it up. It felt cold to the touch. With a flick of her thumbnail, she opened it. On one side was a microscopic, faded photograph of Alina Rostova, the sad-eyed woman from the folder. On the other side, where a picture of the baby or a lover should have been, there was no photo. Instead, there was a tiny, exquisitely detailed engraving. It was a corporate logo, a stylized letter S with a gear encircling it. Carol stared at it, her blood turning to ice. She recognized it instantly from Harold's old business files. It was the logo for Sterling Industries, a massive manufacturing conglomerate from his early career. And then, the final, horrifying piece of the puzzle slotted into place. The name of Amelia Graham's law firm, Donahue, Sterling, and Finch. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a bloodline. It was a legacy. Amelia Graham wasn't just a partner at the firm. The firm was, in some way, her. The lawsuit, the drone, all of it. It was a conspiracy that stretched back decades, tying her husband, this forgotten woman, and one of the most powerful legal and industrial entities in the state together. A floorboard creaked in the main room behind her. Carol whipped around, her heart seizing in her chest. The locket fell from her nerveless fingers, clattering softly on the floor. Standing in the doorway, a dark silhouette against the last vestiges of twilight, was a figure. Not Amelia, not a law